Okay, good morning and welcome to WACO, the Water Advisory Committee of Orange County. Before we start the meeting, we'd like to invite Mr. Joseph Velasco, the President of the Orchard-Dale Water District, to lead us on the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of our country. Joseph.
Good morning, everyone. Please place your right hand over your heart and repeat after me.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Joe. Well, I'd like to ask anybody who is attending the meeting for the first time, please stand up and introduce yourself. We need to be able to recognize you later on. Okay. I'd like to invite anybody who has any comment prior to the meeting, any advice or any issue, please.
Yeah,
Kelly?
Yesterday I noticed a investigation of whiteflies in my backyard, and it might be something you can face. Whiteflies are out now, and they're really vicious. Backyard.
Thank you, Kelly. I'm going to Google what the whiteflies do and then make sure that we take care of it. I'd like to invite Director Linda Ackerman to give us the state of the Met.
Thank you, and good morning. I like that, the state of the Met. That makes it sound really important, which we are, of course. I'll start the morning. We actually have a lot of good news and different news this morning. We did get our two biological opinions released from the feds. I like to call them the feds, June 26th. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and NIMS, the National Marine Fisheries Services, concluded that the proposed project, the Cal Water Fix, would not jeopardize listed species. So now we'll keep moving forward with other regulatory approvals that we need: CEQA, NEPA, ESA Section 7, CESA Section 2081, biological opinion permits, those are the permits dealing with the longfin smelt, and the Army Corps 404 permit. And if you want to know what all those are, you have to serve on a water board for 10 years, and then you'll know what they are. So you go ask somebody who's on the water board. What? I'm kidding. Took me forever to figure out what all those permits were. You don't need to know. You just need to know that we have to seek them, and we will get them. Then we'll need the decision from the State Water Resources Control Board regarding the change in the point of diversions. As you know, we reduced the number and moved them upriver for the tunnels, and of course the river flows. In addition, the Delta Stewardship Council will also weigh in with their Delta Plan certification of the Cal Water Fix. All of these things should be completed by early 2018, but we know how those dates move around sometimes. Next Monday, the Met Board will be discussing the first of three white papers regarding the infrastructure, the first regarding the infrastructure of the project, followed by a second white paper regarding operations, which will occur on the 25th of July, and finally on the 14th of August, the white paper regarding finance and cost allocation for the Cal Water Fix. The board action will then take place on September 12th, and there will be, just prior to that, we will have one more workshop on those white papers. As you know, Met has maintained a fairly healthy media outreach budget in our service area, focusing on conservation during the drought and continuing with the theme of ongoing conservation. This has been a very successful campaign, and it did not go unnoticed by AWWA last month, who bestowed upon Metropolitan the Public Communications Achievement Award. That's a pretty big deal. So we did do a good job with our media, and we have been successful with our water-saving messages. I reported last month that we would be reviewing yet another white paper on IRP policy principles regarding the development and implementation of local resources and conservation projects. We had a robust discussion, and we will be voting on these principles finally next week. They're rather generic principles, ultimately, but we did leave some interpretation regarding funding possibilities of projects and the way they might be chosen. NET continues to invest in mitigation in and around the Delta. It was nice to have a report about a very successful 20-year program on Butte Creek for spring salmon restoration. This was a $6 million investment, which was matched by the federal government. As most of you know by now, MET did prevail on a large portion of our San Diego lawsuit appeal. The appellate court reversed the original ruling on the central issue of our California aqueduct being an integral part of Metropolitan's transportation system of water to its member agencies. The court also agreed to uphold our full service rate, which includes our funding of conservation projects and other local resource developments through that rate. Some parts of the lawsuit were remanded back to court, but the original financial judgment against us was reduced considerably. Finally, the board will consider an action item regarding a one-time in-lieu sale of water to MET's groundwater agencies. MET has, and aren't we fortunate, the ability to store a record amount of water this year, a record amount of water. We do, however, have one big problem. Actually, they're kind of a small thing, the quagga mussel. I reported earlier this year that now we've found them on both branches of the state water system. It has not been genetically verified yet on one branch, but they need to find two of them and get a positive that it's a quagga. Well, they can't find a second one to verify that, whether or not it's really a quagga. So we're held up, and this is holding up groundwater deliveries to a lot of agencies because nobody wants that water. If it is tainted, they can't bring it into their systems. So MET has decided they will be delivering, they're offering, the board will be voting on this. They'll be offering full service treated water with a MET credit up to $225 per acre foot for water certified. The intent of this credit is to create financial neutrality with the agencies in order for them to store these exceptional supplies in our basins. We have up to, I think, almost 400,000 acre feet that we need to store. We do not want to lose it to the ocean. We are also working with the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation to store an extra 200,000 acre feet into our ICS program. So that's important. We're waiting to hear if they will allow us to do that. That's it from me, except for that strange fact that's getting harder to find. This is kind of a long one, and I'll try to be fast, Tim. A century and a half of scientific inquiry cannot yet tell us why ice can make you fall down. It's agreed that a thin layer of liquid water on top of solid ice causes its slipperiness, and that's a fluid mobility, and that a fluid's mobility makes it difficult to walk on, even if the layer is thin. However, there is no consensus as to why ice, unlike most other solids, has such a layer. Some speculate that it may be the very act of slipping or skating, making contact with the ice, that melts the ice surface. Others think the fluid layer is there before the slipper or the skater ever arrived, and it is somehow generated by the inherent motion of surface molecules. I know you're looking for someone or something to blame about this, especially if it's you lying on the ground fuming. But unfortunately, the jury is out on this one. And that is my report.
Thank you, Linda. And now for the report of ACWA, I'm inviting Director Kathy Green, who also will introduce our honored guest today. Thank you, Kathy.
think I'll just do the introduction. I believe Tim can take care of our ACWA report. I know all of you know Tim, but sometimes I think we've known each other for so long that we forget to remind each other all the things people have done. So I did want to read his introduction. He's the Executive Director of the Association of California Water Agencies. Tim leads the largest organization of its kind in the nation. With offices in Sacramento and Washington, ACWA is a statewide association whose 430 local water agencies are responsible for about 90% of the water that is delivered in California. With more than 30 years of experience in California water issues, Quinn has helped shape some of the most significant developments in state water policy in recent decades. His involvement in developing ACWA's statewide water action plan and the Brown administration's California Water Action Plan has helped advance the comprehensive solutions to meet the 21st century water needs. Over the course of his career, Quinn has been a leader in many events that have transformed California water management, including the passage of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act of 2014 and the enactment of Proposition 1, the $7.5 billion general obligation water bond that was overwhelmingly approved by California voters in November of 2014. We're still waiting for some of that money. In addition, he played a key role in developing the California legislature's historic 2009 comprehensive water package, which ushered a new era in water policy, which focused on co-equal goals of improving the state's water supply reliability and restoring the Sacramento-San Joaquin River Delta ecosystem. He also was actively involved in developing the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, the 2000 CalFed Record of Decision, the 1995 Monterey Agreement, the 1994 Bay Delta Accord, and the 1991 Governor's Drought Water Bank. Other accomplishments include successfully negotiating numerous water marketing agreements and legislative initiatives. Prior to joining ACWA as executive director in 2007, Quinn served as deputy general manager for MET and represented the district on numerous state and federal water issues during his 22-year tenure. He joined MWD in 1984 as a principal economist and became deputy general manager in 1994. Before coming to MET, Quinn was project manager at RAND Corporation, specializing in research on natural resources and environmental policy issues. He earned a master's degree in 1976 and a PhD in 1983 in economics from UCLA. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you very much, Kathy. This is why you should have your Facebook entries shorter. I need to start today on a sad note. As I'm sure most of you are aware, Carl Baranke, the general manager, first general manager I served under at the Metropolitan Water District, passed away on Wednesday. He was, in my judgment, the greatest water leader in California over the last half century, and I've been privileged to work with pretty much all of them. He was a fierce boss, a fabulous mentor, and then eventually one of my dear friends. So I'd like to start with just a moment of silence for Carl. Thanks. It's always good to be in this room. You fill up a room fuller than most other places I go early on a Friday morning. And as a lot of you know, in some ways, I feel like my career started in Orange County. I've been coming to Orange County on water matters for not quite 40 years. I was writing a PhD dissertation at UCLA on water law, and particularly on groundwater management, and I came across this thing called the Basin Equity Assessments Program, which just fascinated me at the time. I was in my 20s. I came down here and found a man named Neil Klein, whom I know some of you knew, and although he's been, 4 or 5 GMs ago for the Orange County Water District. And Neil was so generous with his time, listening to my questions, and he was fast. I was an economist, and I had an economic model of the Basin Equity Assessment Program. It was a fascinating time. One of my first exposures to water policy was here in Orange County. This structure didn't exist. Orange County Water District was just right over there all by itself. So I always enjoy coming back. It's a little bit like coming back and visiting your roots. You note the title here of this talk this morning, 2017, A Banner Year for California Water, ? And I want to address why I think it's could be a banner year, and why I put the question mark on that title slide. Nope, that's not what I wanted to do. What do I want to do? Help. It seemed logical to just push that.
You would think.
Okay. Can you get rid of that little rectangle?
You betcha.
Thank you.
How about that?
Thanks a lot. I am here, as always, representing the ACWA Board of Directors. I joke with people that I'd rather work for a 36-member board than a 5-member board, and I certainly mean that. Several of my board members are here, past and present. And they are 36 people who are not afraid to disagree with each other. I think I most enjoy the board meetings where there's open disagreement, because they are very diverse, but they also try and find ways to seek common ground, and that's what makes us an effective organization, in my view. So the board coming into this year knowing that some pretty big deals were out there, a lot of drivers for success right now. We have a committed governor. He's in year 7 of his second 8-year term. He wants to get things done. What? What? I get it now. Okay, we're going to be doing some editing on this slide in the future. I've shown this slide 20 times, and you're the first audience that had this reaction. In any event, I mean committed in the most positive way possible. We have a federal partnership. You have to go back 20 years to where the federal government was actually trying to help California accomplish its goals instead of obstruct California in moving forward its management agenda. I put a question mark there, still to be determined, although the biological opinions that Linda mentioned are a huge sign of a better relationship with the federal government than we've had for a long time. We have a plan. Kathy Green mentioned the ACWA's statewide water action plan, which I think in a lot of ways gave birth to the governor's California Water Action Plan. It's a framework that is supported very broadly throughout ACWA land anyway, and by many environmental organizations, etc. Now, I've got to be careful here about embracing the governor's comprehensive plan too tightly, because we're going to argue like crazy over details. Right now we are arguing like crazy over conservation, but as a framework, the ACWA board believes it works. It defines the future for California, and we're trying to move forward in that future right now. And there are I love this slide, a lot of devil in the details that we're working out. But just because they're devil in the details, then you work them through with each other. You don't stop. Now is no time to stand still in California water in 2017, and we are not standing still. We have I'll talk about each of these things in turn. There's the progress being made on water fix. Still a long road to go, but you got to give them credit for getting over that Endangered Species Act hurdle that they did last month. We're about to move forward on storage, allocating what could lead to $5 to $10 billion worth of new storage in the state of California. We've got this fierce debate going on over conservation, long-term conservation policy. That's now moved into the legislature. And I'm going to finish talking about some of the flow challenges that I think the State Water Resources Control Board is still in a position to make all this happen and work well, or to screw it up pretty significantly. All of this you sort of underlies, I like to point out that California right now, if you look at the potential investment in the tunnels and in storage and in recycling and in desalinating water, we're at the threshold of $25 billion plus. That $25 billion is low. It's a huge step forward in California water. We've been working in this direction for my 30-plus year career, and I think right now we have a better chance to break through than we've had for decades. And my board is keenly aware of that. You can't read that document, but they've gotten pretty good at strategic planning. We can put our strategic plan onto one page. It's right there. I'm going to talk about some of the high priorities. The board meets early every year in a facilitated session and talks about what their priorities are, and that defines what my priorities and staff's priorities are. I'm not going to talk about all of them. I'm not going to talk about our DAC, Disadvantaged Community Drinking Water Initiative, or what we're doing in watersheds, which is a lot, or our new Next Generation Initiative that Tiffany Giamona is working with a lot of your agencies. I'm going to leave a lot of this stuff on the table. I want to talk about some of the higher level policy things that I just mentioned in my introductory remarks. Let's start with the water fix. I think it was significant in December of last year. The governor decided to put out a final EIS for water fix. He basically was saying, I'm tired of messing with all you people. This is what I want. Let's get the process going. And to me, that's what really started triggering 2017 as being a big deal. The statement that says we're done negotiating. By the way, the project's changed enormously as it's gone through the public process. The public process is doing just what it should. It's educating the people that want to move a project forward, changing that project. This project looks very different than it did when I left the Metropolitan Water District 10 years ago. And I think that's a good thing. The State Water Board is conducting water rights hearings. I need to let you know that 29 of my member agencies have filed protests in that process, so I'm anxious to see North and South work things out, and I'm pretty confident that they will. And then the federal government stepped forward with those biological opinions. I haven't read them. I probably never will read them, but the people who are reading them are telling me confidently these are biological opinions that they think they can work with. They can deliver water and do their job and secure the system by all the project is doing is moving an intake. You just can't believe the arguments we're having over a project that's doing nothing more than moving an intake on a large water system from a place where it doesn't work very well to a place where it does work better. From a water quality perspective, from a climate change perspective, from a fish management perspective, from a I think I mentioned water quality. For all those reasons, this is a common sense, logical things to do. It was mentioned it's pretty big project, $17 billion, give or take. That includes a lot of contingency funds. Maybe, hopefully they won't use all that contingency money, but there's nothing cheap about it. Makes a fair amount of common sense. I've got to be careful how I talk about it because I've got members all over the map. I have told the world for, the 10 years I've been executive director, if the one key thing is you can't try and move such a large project by itself. It's got to be part of a broader, comprehensive statewide program that everyone can get behind. And I say with some confidence that I think that's what they're doing in the Brown administration, but they need to keep true to that. And my board of directors fully recognizes that the Delta's broken. I have worked my relationship with my board for 10 years now by asking them to take the challenge of developing pretty detailed and I think good policy documents. The first one I ever asked them to do was on the Delta, because you could see that the Bay Delta Conservation Plan was coming, and that document said if it's part of a comprehensive program, we see why moving the intake is something that's necessary for the governor's comprehensive water action plan. Delta conveyance, more on this later, it makes storage work better, the market works better, habitat restoration is more valuable, the water quality is better, and by the way, you can mitigate the water quality complaints of the folks in the Delta. It is a leveraging investment that makes the rest of the comprehensive program work better. Our key concern is to make sure that it's that comprehensive program that's moving forward. My advice, eyeball to the governor, is don't try and advance a project. Advance a portfolio. Advance a package. And I think that is in fact what they're doing. And they're moving forward to pick up on some of the things that Linda had to say. The environmentalists in the North are trying to minimize the importance of these biological opinions. They're huge. Again, you got over a big hurdle, and there's lots of track in front of you, lots of hurdles in front of you, but that's a big one. The Corps of Engineers permits down the road, this is a huge indicator that you can probably get over that hurdle too. I think some of your The hurdles that remain, 2 court cases have already been filed. There will probably be more. My attitude is get it out there early. Let's start dealing with it and find out if they did their job well when they put together the EIR, EIS, and their permitting strategy. The state board is going to loom huge. I think they're the biggest regulatory decision maker. They're going through this water rights process. You got to amend the permits on the state water project and the federal project to accommodate the change in the place where they want to withdraw water out of the system. And then there's this water quality flow thing that the board's doing, which could mess up a lot of stuff, not just the tunnel. So that's something we have to be dealing with. And then maybe most important are the cost sharing agreements that Linda was mentioning. I've been visiting a lot of boards of directors in the agricultural San Joaquin Valley where they're going to have to pay for this. It's a much tougher call for them than it is for you. So keep your eye out for what happens in those agricultural boardrooms as it was a really expensive project that isn't increasing supplies as much as they'd like it to. Let me move to storage. ACWA has been a long-time supporter of more storage in the system. When I was a new executive director, we were a pretty lonely voice in the legislative debates going on. I mean, there were water bonds on the table in 2008. You remember the Parada water bond? He was a Democrat from Oakland. How much storage was in that bond? 0. And virtually every Democrat thought that was the right thing to do, to have no money allocated for storage. And there was Senator Cogdell's bill, which we supported, that had substantial amounts of water for storage. And again, in those days, we were a pretty lonely voice. And now most everybody agrees that storage is a key element of how we move forward in California. And we passed Proposition 1 by a 2-to-1 margin. Pulled it off the ballot in 2010, pulled it off the ballot in 2012. Looking at our survey results, we wouldn't admit that at the time. And went with it in 2014, and a lot of credit goes to Governor Jerry Brown. But it passed with 67% of the vote, by a 2-to-1 margin, and significantly allocated $2.7 of its $7.5 billion to public benefits of storage. And we've been working with the California Water Commission ever since. And the regulations initially drafted by their staff were a mess. But I put one of my best staff people on it, and many member agencies were very actively involved. And we believe they came up with regulations for allocating that money that are workable. We continue to work closely with the commissioners and their staff to make sure that this happens right. The application date, this is going to be a really interesting date in our world, is August 14th. We'll know who's seeking that $2.6 billion, and I think there's probably going to be some surprises in that for who is and who is not going after Proposition 1 storage dollars. And the $2.7 billion, the governor has made it clear he wants that money allocated on his watch. And depending on how they can give up to 50% of the cost of a storage project. We frankly have been advocating them to resist that. Don't give projects that don't need 50%, so you can leverage that $2.7 billion. If you're from somewhere between $5 and $10 billion, we'd like to see closer to the $10 billion in terms of new storage infrastructure coming out of this allocation in 2018. We'll talk a little bit about something we call the Water Storage Integration Study. Fascinating exercise. That map, there won't be a test. That map shows 8 storage projects on it. From Sites Reservoir in the north, nobody hears, I bet very few have heard of a project called Centennial in Nevada County on the Bear River. It actually makes a lot of sense. Another one, a storage project in the bottom of the Tulare Lake, which was for millennia a place where you stored high-flow Kings River water, and then Boswell and Sawyer 60 years ago said, no, we'd rather push that water up north through Fresno Slough in the Delta and farm that land. Well, they're talking about turning the land back into a storage facility. Lots of local controversy about water rights, etc. But all 8 of those projects, their proponents agreed to participate in an ACWA process Sort of typical ACWA, check your guns at the door. Let's see if we can't cooperate for a while. We pulled not quite $300,000 to buy the modeling services of MBK engineers who are doing much of the modeling work for DWR on the water fix. And the idea here was to do a modeling exercise in which these weren't competing projects in their silos, but rather let's integrate them and see how they work as a whole instead of, I've heard it referred to by my good friend Pierce One as a beauty contest. This is not a beauty contest. It is how do you develop an integrated system that works well. And we started modeling that storage, and then storage with conveyance, and that's an important part of the story. By the way, this report is controversial. We're under attack from certain quarters, but we're out there talking about it as I am today. One thing that's controversial is the study concludes there's quite a bit of water to store across all year types. We were in a drought in 2014, 2015, but how many of you remember 2014 December? It was raining like crazy at my house up near Folsom Reservoir, and there were some big spikes of stormwater in the system, even though it wound up being a critically dry year. In our wet years, on average, there's about 20 million acre-feet of water that goes by the Delta pumps out to the Golden Gate Bridge, and we're very careful. We don't use the word surplus in this study. We don't say that water is a waste. It's not a waste. Water staying in the ecosystem has value, but it's widely agreed that in a year of abundance, or in a period of abundance, you can take a small fraction of that water and store it and manage it for the benefit of both of the co-equal goals. And that's was the spirit behind this study. Things like if you invest in those storage projects, you get, on average, almost 2 million acre-feet of additional carryover water. That's huge. It's especially huge, about 1 million acre-feet of additional carryover water in critically dry years. Wish to heck we had that during this last drought. That's a significant benefit all by itself. Look at the bar charts on the right. They show by year type, wet years on the left, the drier years as you move to the right, and then the last bar is an average. The top shows supply benefits of storage investments without conveyance. And it's significant. It approaches 500,000 acre-feet a year. The bottom chart shows what happens if you add conveyance to the mix. Study this for a minute. Conveyance doubles the productivity of your storage investments. Conveyance doubles the storage productivity, the productivity of your storage investments. To me, that's pretty huge. And then look more carefully. It's not doing much for you in the critical and the dry years because you've got plenty of opportunity to move water. The little water you've got in those years, you can move it around. You're not really conveyance constrained in those years. But look at those wet period bars, the 3 bars on the left. What conveyance is doing is opening up storage to true wet period saving of water in ways you can't do without conveyance because the system is so constrained with those South Delta intakes during the wetter years. We also looked at the benefits to groundwater basins, and this chart is designed to make it look dramatic. Over an 80-year run of these models, you're getting about up to 500,000 acre-feet of groundwater overdraft offset, most of it in the San Joaquin Valley. That's more surface water being delivered in lieu of groundwater pumping. My reaction to that, though, when I first saw that 500,000 acre-feet of groundwater overdraft correction is why is it so small? Because if you're at all familiar with the overdraft challenge in the San Joaquin Valley, this makes a dent, but not a very big dent. And the more I thought about it, the more it seemed that was a logical outcome. Because if you really, we're only modeling here the projects that have been proposed. And this is a lesson for those of you south of the Delta. You haven't proposed any big projects. We've got about 120,000 acre-feet of additional storage capacity with the San Luis expansion. We've got about 120,000 acre-feet of storage capacity. These are small numbers in storage land. In the Lake Bottom project, there's an Irvine Ranch partnership up in Kern County with Rosedale Rio Bravo. That's in the modeling. But if you look at that, that is not very much. I like to call it parking lot storage to capture water in the year like this and then move it down when the groundwater basins can take it. We're not doing that. We're not looking at how do you optimize groundwater replenishment during wet years, and we intend to correct that. The next step with our storage study, we had a very high-energy conference call with some San Joaquin Valley members earlier this week. to launch what, for lack of the working title in Tim's head is the Groundwater Replenishment Initiative, and it's going to start looking. I want to flip the logic. Normally, modeling logic, you start in the north and it moves south. You assume a facilities in the north and operating rules, and then the water moves south to the people that want to use it. And that's what we did in our study, and it left only a 500,000 acre-foot of groundwater benefit. So I want to flip that north-south logic to be south-north logic. And we're going to start a process asking how much groundwater replenishment water could you take if we can deliver it to you at the right time. In June, July, August, September, the groundwater replenishment basins in San Joaquin Valley are dry. A lot of the farmers could still be hooked up to dual systems and take in lieu water. What we're going to find out is the absorptive capacity of these groundwater basins is huge. And then we want to think from south to north, what kind of system would we need to invest in to take advantage of that absorptive capacity? But this, by the way, is going to be controversial because we want to look for ways to take more of that high period flow water and get it into groundwater basins. I don't know that it affects you guys down here that much, but for my San Joaquin Valley members, it is almost life versus death. They either find a way to get more replenishment water into their basins, or they get ready to contract their economies to fulfill the requirements of SGMA. And by the way, SGMA is not the real problem. The real problem is they're overdrafting their groundwater basins. So keep an eye on this one. I did meet with Mike Marcus this morning, and I think the Orange County folks ought to at least keep track of this. And Mike was certainly eager to do so. So let me move on. I only have one slide on conservation. I can give 30 minutes on it, but I'm not going to. Right now, keep in mind we're having this fierce argument between Friedman's bill, Rubio's bill, and right now it's changing by the day, by the way, it's changing by the minute, I think. We used to be arguing over a field this wide, and now we're arguing over a field that's about this wide. I'm pretty confident we're going to find a way to bridge the gaps. The fate of Western civilization I don't think is at stake here, but it is certainly, it's important that we're checking off the box on the governor's plan to make conservation as a way of life. I would point out that you've been doing it down here for 30 years. You just don't get as much credit as you probably should do. And the teamwork amongst ACWA member agencies couldn't be better. This is a Dave Bolin special. He's a cat herder extraordinaire. We had 114 agencies sign on to a substantive comment letter to the state board when they were doing their conservation framework, and we're taking that cohesiveness and moving it into the legislature. We are strongly behind two bills, the AB 1323 Weber and AB 1654 Rubio. So make sure you're talking to your legislators. We want those bills to pass, although, again, this is changing by the minute. And we fiercely oppose AB 1668 Friedman. We're still watching her 1667, which is on agricultural water use. Very active this year. They will pass a law that will set the stage for long-term conservation. The main wrestling is going on here over how much control should the state regulators have and how much autonomy should we have. We're the local agency association, so we think that that discretion needs to be placed at the local level, and we're fighting pretty hard to make sure that that's what happens. And then I want to close. Hopefully, it looks like I will be leaving plenty of time for questions. I want to close, though, to talk at a little more detail level about what's happening on this flow stuff, because I just think it's hugely important. The water quality control plan for the Bay Delta, the flow requirements for the Bay Delta, basically we're operating with what was negotiated back in 1994 as amended by biological opinions, which amended it a lot in 2007 and 2008. And so the state board is looking at a whole new regimen that's got everybody quite concerned. But integrating flows into the package is the elephant in the room, and we have to be dealing with it. And frankly, we need to get the administration to deal with it a little more forthrightly than I think they are right now. My board of directors, if you haven't read it, you should. This is a big deal, and they actually had a special board meeting, which they rarely do, on the telephone in March, to approve a policy document that's pictured there. And the policy document, I'm going to walk you through it in a fair amount of detail, basically breaks down into three parts. The first part expresses deep concerns about where the state board seems to be headed with their proposal. The second says, here are some criteria, some things you can check off that will send you in the right direction, that will work better for coastal goals. And all we are after is good policy here, quite frankly. This isn't a war against flows for fish. It is a war for smart flows for fish. And then lastly, there are some common sense benchmarks for success that are included in the policy document. And we certainly are concerned about where the State Board is going in their SED. The SED stands for Substitute Environmental Document. And their SED was written around a concept that they call unimpaired flows. And they want to set a percentage of unimpaired flows on all waterways in the Bay Delta that where over this very long block of time you have to meet this percentage requirement, even if they don't have the slightest idea what good it's doing for fish. It's very much a flow-centric policy. For the San Joaquin River, they've established a band of 30 to 50%, and they'll tell you how generous they're being because they started at 75%, then they went to 60%, and now they're just at 30 to 50%. Doesn't that make them very reasonable? We're not sure we agree with that. And the docket, the SED, it does acknowledge the potentially important role of non-flow actions. It does acknowledge the importance of voluntary agreements, and they have not fought the negotiations that are now going on. But the fact is that its heart and soul, it is a flow document. It was built in a flow silo. Over years, we objected to it constantly. In a world of co-equal goals, it made no sense to us to put a bunch of scientists off into a silo where they would only talk about one thing, flow, and not how it integrated with the rest of the package. So we could see this train coming for some time. And when they did finally put the proposal on the table earlier this year, it caused very widespread concern. Those are all pictures from public meetings in the Turlock-Modesto area, because they are looking at a very large loss of agricultural water. Huge. It's hundreds of thousands of acre feet that would be lost to those local economies under any, because percentage of unimpaired flows, it's an unforgiving friend. Doesn't matter how important that water is to you or how unimportant it is to the environment, they want that percentage to be going on the average over a 6-month period, and that is a lot of water. Tens of thousands of acres of land would have to come out of production. The cities would have a pretty sizable dent in the reliability of their water. I find it rather interesting that there are only two basins in the San Joaquin Valley that are currently classified as in balance, and both of those at the stroke of Felicia Marcus's pen would be thrown into critical overdraft conditions. So we're finding ourselves asking, how is such a proposal consistent with a policy of co-equal goals, which was mentioned in my introduction? Co-equal goals says we're supposed to improve water supply and improve ecosystem health. Improve, not improve and degrade. We don't see how this is consistent with the legal doctrine of co-equal goals, or with the implementation of SIGMA. From my members' perspective, the important thing about implementing SIGMA is let's leave those economies intact that are on the overlying land. This makes it very difficult to do that. And we don't think you can implement. I don't know if it's a fatal blow to the governor's Delta plan, but it sure doesn't help move you forward in implementing those plans. And it probably does stop storage projects. It's just consuming way too much water. We don't think that it's consistent with any of those things, and we think before they're done, they should be consistent with those things. And the board's principles identify how to get there. In particular, they strongly advocate a collaborative versus an adversarial regulatory process. I don't think you can get co-equal goals out of an adversarial process. I think it's just flat impossible. Co-equal goals almost always requires comprehensive solutions. That's the next bullet down there. They're complicated. You need cooperative behavior, which you're not going to get in a harshly adversarial process at the state board or in a courtroom. And you have to change how you think about doing your flow regime in the system. Let me talk about each of those in turn. On the collaborative side, the Brown administration seemed to get it from the beginning. The day that the SED came out, the governor sent this letter to Felicia Marcus saying basically two things: don't regulate, negotiate, and don't do this piecemeal, one stream at a time. Let's look at the Bay Delta system as a whole. And we had just some hand in what this letter had to say, and we strongly agreed with both counts. And I want to emphasize that I'm not trying to turn Felicia Marcus or the State Board into ogres here. All we are talking about is a better way for them to accomplish their goals that are consistent with these broader policy criteria in California water. And there's a team out there. And some of you will recognize the top right picture. That's Bruce Babbitt. 20 years ago, we had actually a sane, healthy relationship with the federal government, not to a substantial degree because of that man. He was the Secretary of Interior at the time, and I was one of the people that helped lure him back into California water. Today, he is a state employee. He works for he gets his paycheck from the Resources Agency in the state of California, and it's very clear that he and Governor Brown have got a very tight relationship of trust. So when we were meeting with the governor, as all this was happening, we emphasized the importance of having somebody who could speak for the governor, somebody who could speak for the administration with one voice, and we got Bruce Babbitt, and I think that was a good outcome. Carla Nemeth, who's everywhere. The problem with this administration is they're just so thinly staffed that they're working people like poor Carla half to death. Mark Cowan is retired, but he's back as a consultant, working pretty intensely on this stuff, as is Chuck Bonham, the head of Fish and Wildlife. And they've got 4 negotiations going on. Actually, I don't think they've really started the Delta, and we're telling them the Delta is the central when you can't resolve any of the other bubbles here if they don't know what their responsibility is going to be downstream in the Delta. So they're working on it. It's the biggest negotiation in California water since 20 years ago when we were doing the Bay Delta Accord. And for the first time in my career, I'm not directly at these negotiating tables, and I'm suffering withdrawal symptoms. You're only going to be successful in a negotiation this complex if you are committed to comprehensive solutions. The problems are complex. They need integrated solutions. On our side of the table, this is the list of what we've been doing for 30 years. We've spent $20 billion, and we're counting. And we've done an amazing thing. We have uncoupled the growth imports relationship that was really difficult for us to manage 25, 30 years ago. It's, for practical matters, gone. And that's because we as an industry dramatically changed how we think about managing these resources we're responsible. And we need the same thing to happen within the regulatory process. This is a list of their tools. There's a lot of them. They don't integrate them. They tend to think only about the bottom tool, the flow tool, and we're asking them to seriously consider changing it. I don't think you can get to yes in these negotiations unless the state board comes up with a more effective way to handle these flow questions. And the percentage of unimpaired flow model, we don't think it's going to work. They seem to say, well, you guys can go negotiate over here, but we've already made our flow decision independent of that, and as long as you're consistent with our 30 to 50% range of unimpaired flow, then you can go ahead and negotiate. I don't think that gets you to yes, and I think eventually Mr. Babbitt and our team are going to find that out. The top-down approach, as I said, it allocates this huge block of water over a very long period of time. When you ask them, well, what do you think that's going to do, they don't have good answers to those questions. The flows are not connected to the rest of the package, hardly at all. And because it's a highly inefficient process, it's got really big negative effects on ACWA members, particularly in the San Joaquin Valley. And all we're asking the State Board is to come up with a more effective and more efficient approach for flow requirements. We're not asking them to give up anything on their core interests. We're just asking them, by the way, this is how big negotiations work. It's a search for efficiencies so that you can accomplish your goals without so much damage to the other side of the table. That helps you get to yes. And we want them desperately to get the yes. And we're still, frankly, working on how to communicate this to the State Board and the administration. What do we want them to do? We want them to implement true integrated resources planning, just what we did 30 years ago. Stop thinking one tool at a time and start thinking integrated packages. Make sure that all the tools within a life cycle framework for these fisheries are on the table. When you look at flows, please develop them from bottom up. We call this a functional flow approach. ask yourself, what functions do I need flows to provide, and then build your flow demands from the bottom up instead of from the top down. Bottom up is inherently more efficient, and you'll be much more effective. And make sure you're linking flows to other parts of the package where that's appropriate. Best example of that, I think the theme here should be floodplain inundation and floodplain restoration. One of the things we did to the environment over the course of 100 years of economic development was we severed the relationship between land and water, and that had big negative consequences for the environment. This is an opportunity to reconnect them. Well, as you're doing that, and by the way, if you read the SED, they talk there's page after page about the benefits of floodplain inundation, but when you ask them, well, what floodplains are we talking about? They don't know. But we should be answering that question. Which floodplains are we going to target? How big are they? Do we have the right temperature requirements? Do we have the right topography for that? And most important from us, okay, let's do that. Let's agree to that. How much water is it going to take to make that a productive investment? Let's give it that water, and not 5 times that much water. So we are asking them to do integrated resources planning the way we do integrated resources planning. Guess what? It worked for us, and we think it will work for them. If you adopt this common sense stuff coming from my board of directors, you're going to dramatically improve the productivity of the flows that you use because you're aiming them at particular functions, and you're not going to have nearly as much waste. And you're going to significantly reduce the impacts on water users to help achieve the COICO goals, and that's the magic elixir that will get you to yes at these negotiating tables, and we are certainly hopeful that they'll see it that way. One last thing about the board's flow policy principles is, for us, some pretty common sense metrics. You ought to be able to check these boxes off when you're done, and they can't do any of them with the SED. One is, does it have broad support, in particular amongst the community that you're regulating? That's us. Does it significantly enhance the environment? It's got to do that, and we're not for anything other than substantial environmental enhancement. We want that to happen consistent with a more reliable water supply. That's a direct quote from the 2009 law that created the concept of COICO goals. But it needs to improve our water supply, not degrade our water supply. It needs to be consistent with the growing ag and urban economies, not with a deteriorating economy. Does it help accomplish the roles of SIGMA? And again, for us, that is, we want SIGMA implemented, and we want healthy economies over the long term on overlying lands. And does the policy promote the implementation of the Governor's California Water Action Plan? When you're done, you should be able to say yes to each of those questions, or you're not done. And we're going to be, quite frankly, holding them accountable to that. Last, the policy document is a plea for leadership. This stuff is not easy. I have all my years and 30-plus years in water, I've always told my staff, first at MWD and then at ACWA, war is easy. And if you're going to fight a war with the other guys, you just go into your silo, you say the same thing you've been saying for decades. You don't get anything done. You lob a shell at the other side every once in a while. It's pretty easy. You don't accomplish much, but it's pretty easy. Collaboration is hell. In collaboration, you have to leave your silo. You have to think differently than your silo. Every time you make a step towards a major deal that's thinking from the other silo's perspective, you're irritating somebody in your silo. I know. I've experienced it through a 30-year career. You keep doing that, and then eventually you find another job. This will require real leadership. And we definitely need that to happen on the part of the governor, part of people like Bruce Babbitt, and especially Felicia Marcus. We do not want to undo the State Water Resources Control Board. We want to give them a different direction that will make them much more effective at what they do in a manner that we can live with. And that's what I've got for you this morning. Failure, by the way, is not an option. Success is not assured, but I don't think failure is an option. And I would be glad to listen to comments and answer any questions that you have. Doug in the back.
Yeah, Tim, do you worry that we won't get close enough to the finish line before his term is up and we could lose all of with somebody new coming in our direction? Sure,
I do. But Doug, in my career though, I've I've watched 6 presidents come and go and 5 governors come and go. Soon there'll be a 6th governor. And so these transitions are not new. And the way that ACWA will try and deal with it is we are working right now on building very broad-based coalitions that are hard to tip over. Business, agriculture, labor, the environmentalists that we can work with. And when we get a new administration, we intend to take those large coalitions in with briefing materials saying, this is why you need to keep going in a particular direction. So the risks are there, but it's not like we haven't been through many transitions of leadership on the state and federal sides before. As I said, keep your eye on the ball. The ball is good policy, better water management on both the ecological and the water management side. Get your story as straight as possible and then get a big coalition behind it to try and keep momentum. And so that's what we will do with whatever Democrat occupies the State House. Sorry for the down, but okay. Fred?
On the cost of the water fix, I recall a time when it was estimated that it would cost as high as $25 billion. Then it dropped down for the last few years to 15. Now it's going to be back up to 7. Is the 15 to 25 general range?
I would go to the official number of the administration. It's $17 billion. That includes a 36% contingency fee. The $25 billion, and you, by the way, your higher numbers, those are invariably by people who don't want the project to succeed, so they exaggerate its costs. Is it expensive? Well, from some perspectives, it is expensive. But I like to use the analogy of, I mean, right now, a lot of the ag contractors say, well, how much water do I get and what's the cost per acre foot? I got to tell you, that's not the right question to be asking yourself. To me, this is like the water main under your house breaks, and are the husband and wife going to have a fight over, well, should we fix it? I don't know how much water we're going to use next month. The water main just broke, for God's sakes. You fix it or you move out of the house. And that's the choice you're facing in the Delta. You fix it or eventually you move out of the house. So the $17 billion to fix the transportation system that's moving 5 to 6 million acre-feet of water a year to this economy, the notion that it's unaffordable, I just think is laughable. And the worst mistake we could possibly make is to not take advantage of this opportunity because we want to pinch pennies. That's how we got ourselves into this mess in the first place. 50 years ago, we wanted to pinch pennies when we could have built a facility for $1.5 billion. Yes, sir.
Yes, I mean, the basic part of the spiel here was dealing with the flow of water going from north to south, and then the storage of that water. I was surprised I didn't hear more about GWRS, because that down here anyway, that has a pretty good storage capacity to it in our aquifer underneath us. Are there other units up there from the state considering groundwater replenishment systems?
Sure there are. I mean, but look, nobody's in your league. No, nobody's going to be in your league, I don't think. But groundwater replenishment is a huge issue that's being driven by the passage of SGMA. And what we want to do with our replenishment initiative is get all the different perspectives. And again, I was here this morning early to make sure that Mike Marcus knows what's going on. I got a session with Rob in a little bit. I want Orange County involved. I want the LA groundwater basins involved. I want the Inland Empire basins involved. It's going to be a really different discussion for you guys. I don't think you're looking at life or death on this, but a lot of my members in the San Joaquin Valley are. But I want to make sure. By the way, we will also reach up north into the Sacramento Valley, where their groundwater challenges are way different from the San Joaquin Valley. And I think we're looking here at a potential demand center for water from a project like Sites. If Sites can capture it and hold it until they can deliver it to a groundwater basin above consumptive demands during the summertime, that's all good. Yes, sir.
Quick question. The Central Valley presentation, you showed several pictures up there. What was the consensus of those meetings in terms of what do we want or what's going on? What's the general?
I'm sorry, consensus of which meetings were about what?
I thought you had presented some pictures from the Central Valley. And I wonder what the outcome of that.
I showed a map that showed consensus. What? Those were hearings in Turlock and Modesto and Sacramento, from the trib agencies who are on the front line right now, because the substitute environmental document, the first place it's going to apply is on the San Joaquin River and its tributaries. That's the Tuolumne, the Merced, and the Stanislaus. And so those guys are in front and center. They're looking at the loss of hundreds of thousands of acre-feet of water out of their ag economy, and they're frankly mad as hell. But they're a very active part of the coalition we're putting together to come up with the thing about functional flows, ladies and gentlemen, functional flows doesn't mean no flows. Matter of fact, it may mean substantial flows. You'll just know what you're getting for your darn water. So we need, frankly, these negotiations will succeed if we make functional flows mean something meaningful and we can sell it to the regulators. So far, the leadership in that part of the world, we got very active communications going with, and I'm really pleased at how progressive they're being. They are looking for solutions, but we're letting the state board know if you don't change, you got a fight on your hands. Yes, sir.
Tim, last time you were here, you said the water markets were broken. How does that stand today?
I may have overspoke. Look, you're referring to, we had a water marketing initiative, which we're not pursuing. It's not on my priorities now. And it's not largely because all of the large transactors came and said, we don't think it's broken, and if you try and fix it, it might wind up worse than it is today. So that's not a major initiative at ACWA under the current ACWA strategic plan. I think the most important thing you can do for the market is move the intake on the big projects. I mean, because the market is broken in the sense sellers above the delta, buyers below the delta. Delta is a huge bottleneck, which traps you into a south of delta to south of delta market. And if you can open that up with more flexible operating rules over the next decade plus, and then with a facility that actually can move water with little or no amount of consequences. I started my first 15 years in this business. I did water marketing. If you include groundwater partnerships up in Kern County as part of water marketing, and I thought it would be really important then in the 21st century, and I still think it will be. But we need to open it up. Here.
Tim, if I can paraphrase what I heard you say, and have you confirm or deny it. It looks like with the biological opinions, we're going to get permits to build a facility. So
it opens up the
possibility of building a facility is kind of way out. What you also said is that you got a 2-year period of time, and you have a political body, a state board, and other people that at the end, the completion of the facility, you may not be able to use it the way you think it can be. So there's a gamble here, and that we have to be very vigilant about that on a going forward basis. Is that sort of where we are?
80% yes. I just want to emphasize that the biological opinions don't assure you get to build a facility. You've got a lot of regulatory hoops you still have to go through. And you've got to be vigilant and yet flexible. There aren't going to be any fixed rules over time. In my mind, it's really hard to imagine a circumstance in which you'd rather leave the intakes in the South Delta. You need them in the North Delta. They have the best chance you have of wrestling with the regulators in the future, even though you did identify, Pierre, one of the risk factors is this is not an HCP. You don't get 50 years of assurances. It's a Section 7 permitting action under the Endangered Species Act, which leaves a great deal of discretion in the hands of those biologists that are implementing the Endangered Species Act. And that's a risk factor, but it's going to be much easier to deal with them if you eliminate the enormous physical conflict that we've got today between us, our water supply, and the fish because our intake's in the wrong place. They lose an awful lot of their arguments for taking your water away if you build. It's like putting scrubbers on your factory so that you're not emitting stuff up that's polluting the air anymore. You can't survive in a world where we care about clean air without those scrubbers. So it's a chance to build the scrubbers in the back of the room.
Just curious to the extent that you're doing temperature taking, you're communicating directly with Newsom, Villaraigosa, Chang, kind of the marquee candidates for governor, and what, if you're getting any indication from them on your policy objectives and where they stand?
Well, so far they all worry me. And we haven't really gotten serious yet. We'll have to wait for the election to get closer. But one thing I was mentioning to some of the people before, currently my strategic thinking is to approach those candidates through a very large, diverse coalition of common interests. So we have something that we call Clean Water and Jobs for California. It's a 401c4. I'm the president of the board of directors, but it's the Chamber of Commerce, California Building Property Association, California, the CBIA, every name, all of the major California Manufacturers Association, all the business, then every trade union in California is a member of Clean Water and Jobs for California. The trade unions are the guys that actually build stuff. Western growers, a lot of production ag folks. So it's a very, and we work on relationship with the environmentalists, but so far it's largely developmental based. But I want that kind of broad-based coalition to put together common briefing materials for the incoming governor, and we will at probably the middle of next year offer to sit down with all of the viable candidates to explain why, from this very broad-based coalition perspective, you need to keep certain things moving that are happening in this administration. We did the same thing when Jerry Brown came in, and Brown basically, I could get in a lot of trouble for saying this, but he was Me Too to what Arnold Schwarzenegger had done from a water perspective. Everything that was important to us under Schwarzenegger continued, although there was a factor there that Jerry Brown's dad built a system, and he's keenly aware of it. So that gave you an argument that you don't have with the new set. But we will be very mindful about making sure that they're getting briefed. Yes, sir, and then Linda.
First of all, thank you very much for a great presentation.
Thank you.
One of the opportunities coming in is to get the speaker group that puts together speakers do such a fine job. So kudos to them as well. Within the last 4 or 5 months, we had the director of Delta System come in and talk. And I wanted to hit on the aspects of habitat and working with non-governmental organizations and NGOs. He showed where there were 7 major restoration projects in the Delta that had done a great job, and he was singing praises, and the fact that he even helped the habitat for a lot of salmon fly coming down, where the reeds were put back in, the whole habitat, flowing guys, and the whole process. I went back and mapped out those 7, and all 7 were done by my organization, Outside London. We did design, manufacture, co-invested with money in the game along with state and federal. Going forward, is there going to be an opportunity for groups such as like our own, Unlimited, to go in that has the expertise in that habitat restoration for wetlands, which is a leading wetlands organization for obviously with 15 million acres under management, to go forth with this process?
The short answer to your question is yes, an emphatic yes, because I think the secret to our side of this debate is to work with people like you and come up with a very grand vision of where we need to go and then make it happen. Write down the name Roger Patterson. He's at the Metropolitan Water District, good phone ring. I know they're already working with conservation groups in Northern California, but add your voice to it, because as I said before, our strategy is not a strategy for which there's no water going to the environment. It will involve water going to the environment. It's just in a much more effective and efficient way, and we'll be getting much more out of things in terms of a co-equal goal metric than we can get out of the path we're on today. So call Roger. And come up to me later, I'll give you his contact information. Linda.
This is not a question, and I was going to report on this, but I thought that Tim would cover the flow issue. We had a board action item at our last meeting where we were asked to support and agree with the ACWA paper, the flow requirement paper that they did. It was surprising to me that we actually had a bit of a discussion about this. We have one agency that votes no on everything, questions everything. The one of those agencies is. But we have another agency, or agency member, who is part of the Millis, and we began a robust discussion about the environmental side, and we didn't feel it was going to happen. The discussion went on, and we're all like, shaking our heads, and somebody said, well, why do we have to support this now? And the answer was because we agree with the paper. None of the policies in that paper disagree with any
planning on spending some time with that large agency that was voicing dissent. And I went back to this slide because this is important. We're not asking the state board to not do its job. We're asking the state board to rethink how it does its job and adopt a much more efficient and effective mechanism that leaves room for us to do our job. We're not asking them to do anything other than better policy, better management. And I'm hopeful that my dear friend Felicia Marcus, she's been a good friend for 25 or more years, will realize what we're asking her to do is be in front of a pretty important parade here. Something that does the kind of change that we're very proud of in our community. We went through this 25, 30 years ago, and we feel pretty good about it today. I think if we can get them to look around this corner, right now they're stuck in their flow silo. They think that's the way regulators do their job. If we can get them to look around the corner, that corner, I think they're going to be just as happy they did it as we are.
The state board seems to really have been impressed by Australia, what they've done with water, and so they tried to model conservation and other things after that. Are they doing the same about flows? Are they looking at other states like Washington State and seeing how they're managing flows and learning from their lessons?
Not to my knowledge.
They really need to. They have a different flow document that they work off of minimal flows.
They really do have they've got a flow mentality. They go into their flow silo and they think their flow thoughts, and they come out. To them, I think they sit back and it's perfectly logical, the sequences they're going through. And they think we're being a bunch of hysterical, crazy people because they come out of their silo and we say, oh my God, that's devastating for us. So, but again, I'm convinced we can get them, because if you come into my office, the first thing you'll notice is on my desk there's a sign. It says, I am an optimist. And I'm an optimist here as in everything. I think we'll get them to see a different way.
Can you comment, you've been around with the peripheral canal issues also.
Only for 35, 40 years.
And the question is, we went through generally the same process, certainly not as rigorous as what we're going through right now, leading to a metal transfer facility. And so we got to go ahead on the peripheral canal, and all of a sudden the referendum issue surfaced. Do you have any thoughts or plans on trying to, whatever it might take to reduce that probability of repeat performance?
Great question, Don. I'm aware of nothing that's moving to the ballot box. Cortopassi tried it in the last cycle. He's a wealthy Delta landowner that tried to get an initiative passed that would make it illegal to use revenue bonds to pay for big infrastructure if the state was involved. It was a direct shot at the tunnels, and he failed, although he didn't fail by very many votes. So I don't think, I'm not aware of anything that's headed in that direction. So the fighting is going to happen in the courts. Right now, that's going to happen. We will keep we'll keep our ear to the ground. This is different though than '82. In '82, the legislature had made a definitive decision about how to deal with water policy. They passed legislation that said we're going to build a peripheral canal, basically authorizing it. And Tom Graff and company, they challenged that legislative action through the referendum process, which our Constitution allows them to do. You don't have that situation today. We did legislate in 2009, but the legislature didn't pick a direction. They just allowed a process to move forward, and that process tried to beat ECP on an HCP and didn't succeed, and it's now where it is today. But it's not the same thing where the legislature has made a decision that you can go in and undo. So they'll have to be more clever. The way Dino was. I mean, Cortopassi came up with his financing strategy as a way to try and stop things. So it's not going to be easy. We'll keep our eyes open. But there's a much bigger coalition right now that would like to see this succeed. And ACWA is a big part of that. I mean, that map I showed with north-south support for the Statewide Water Action Plan, that action plan had a Delta facility in it. A facility, I can't say a facility in it, and a lot of our northern members are prepared to stand up and go shoulder to shoulder with you. Fred?
Tim, Don's comment about sparked the memory of an article which was encapsulated the phrase, time, it's just too expensive.
particularly, city council members, supervisors, and so forth. I try to explain all this, which is important in the presentation. There isn't time for all this. How do I capture into 10, 15, or 10 words or less, which is just stretch the reasons on the person, not a few words.
Fred, that's not my expertise, but I think we need to make the message simple. I agree with that. And I'll take your question to my communications department Monday. Carl.
It's a flavor of the Delta Stewardship Commission, the Delta Protection Commission, and in the Delta interest, where they're coming from in this process, and if they will be successful around changing things.
The Delta, I think you're probably referring to the Delta Stewardship Council that is chaired by Randy Fiorini, part of the solution, not part of the problem. The problem with the council is, quite frankly, their first leader, Phil Eisenberg, whom I adore, but Phil is no Delta Facilities fan, and he took them off in this we're the biggest, baddest regulators in the world direction. We created the council to be a body where you could go and integrate things, where people could listen to each other and work together and strike deals. And then Phil took them in the direction of being the world's great regulator of conservation. We, of course, fought back and stopped him pretty much cold in his tracks. And Fiorini is trying to pull the council out of the trench that the previous leader threw him in, and he's doing remarkable, courageous things. This Randy Fiorini, for those of you who don't know him, is from the Turlock part of California. He's a fourth-generation farmer, and he's showing tremendous courage in all these meetings he's holding in the Delta, and the Delta people come forth with, let's just say, not a lot of fact-driven arguments, and Randy's taking them on. I've been reading some of the transcripts. It's remarkable. Now, the Delta Protection Commission, that's different. That is supervisors from the Delta counties. They will be implacable foes of this until the death, and you just got to figure out a way to maximize, I call it the sizing of the tent problem. You need as many people inside your tent as you can get there to get a political coalition that will stand up to what's going to happen to it from the Delta Protection Commission types who need to be on the outside of the tent, but you need to build that coalition inside your tent as big as you can so that you can withstand the efforts to try and knock you over. And I tell you, frankly, if ACWA's provided any function here, I was one of the great coalition builders from the export community in my 22 years at MWD, and in my new job, we sort of structure things where if you want success, you better be part of the statewide coalition, and that's where things have moved. But the Southern Californians here, you need to be thinking, how do I build relationships, how do I build coalitions with people in the North and others that will support where we need to go in common. You'll find that's going to be a comprehensive program. It's because the tent's got to be pretty big to keep people on board. And then when that next administration comes up, Doug, you make that coalition as big and irresistible as possible. Yes, sir.
So in a perfect world for water managers, the fixes is in functioning, more storage. Will there ever be a time in the future when we're not fighting over water, the north versus south?
I have to tell you that north versus south is tiny today compared to what it was at the beginning of my career. And I've been a part of that. I mean, I've been, as I said a minute ago, a coalition builder from day one. I was an economist. Economists believe in mutually beneficial trade. Lawyers believe in winners and losers. I don't mean, by the way, to anything negative about any attorneys in the room, but in the professional world, north versus south is almost gone. Amongst the public, that's not true. It's not hard to if you go up north and you're at a patio party of somewhere in the Bay Area and you say that you're a water manager in Orange County, they'll look at you over their lenses like, what's the matter with you? But the water managers, by and large, we put north versus south behind us some time ago, I think. Again, not entirely, but my organization's had a lot to do with that. East-west, that's different. East-West is a bigger conflict right now. I get more tension in my job from East versus West. East is urban, rich, coastal, Democrat, California versus inland, which is less wealthy, rural, Republican, conservative. The East-West divide is a much bigger factor in my life than North versus South, and which we need to work on bridging that. Which is, I didn't mention the Ag Initiative here, but that's kind of where the Ag Initiative comes from. It's my board's efforts to try and heal and build bridges between the East and the West, and that's going pretty well. Well, speakers like lots of questions, so thank you. You're a great audience.
Well, let's thank our honored speaker today again. And this meeting is adjourned. Go home and safe, please.